Today we start with Alexandre da Cunha, who's originally, well, he was born in Rio de Janeiro, but he grew up in the state of Minas Gerais and moved to London around 20 years ago to do an MA, yeah. And mainly built his career in this country. So without further ado, I'm gonna ask Alexandre to start his presentation. Thank you.
Hi everyone. When Kiki invited me to do this talk, I initially thought about doing a general presentation about my work, and when I found out that I had about 15-20 minutes, I thought it was better to show less work and focus on more recent works. So it's the first time I'm talking about these works. So, I made a selection of recent sculptures, and mostly public commissions that I've been doing since last year or 2 years ago, which is a new practice, a new thing in practice. And it's been also a very good experience for me to shift my practice from the studio to public terrain or domain. And not only in terms of the scale, but in terms of the dynamics with other people and with myself and the materials and how I work. So I'm going to just start by showing you some sort of early-ish works I made in 2008. And although the titles are making reference to public sculpture, they actually don't work as public sculptures because of the materials. So these pipes, they are sewer pipes, industrial pipes. So I made a series of those sculptures. They're about this high, 150, and using standard prefabricated precast concrete pipes. And the color element is foam used in furniture. So this, the story behind this, it starts by me collecting pictures of these sort of materials that in Brazil you find a lot in roads and spaces outside when you see like a lot of building sites. And I've been always intrigued by the use of these materials as this sort of casual sculptures, if you like, that happen and just appears in the city. And it's to do with the idea of like development, gentrification, progress, or changes in the city. So through this idea, this research and this collection, I started actually making sculptures in the studio. And maybe, Kiki, can I show you another one? I don't know if there's another one. Oh, sorry. So yeah, back to what I was saying before, the other sculptures. I made a series of them, maybe I had 6 or 7 different shapes, but always combining different pipes in different compositions. And this is a more recent work, possibly this was the first public commission. This is in London, in West London. And this to me was a really big challenge because I was invited to do this public commission for this square. And it was a space in between new buildings, and I really struggled at the beginning to come up with an idea. Most of my work is sort of small to medium scale to do something much bigger and monumental. So initially I was thinking of using domestic, small, banal objects as I used in my general practice, and enlarge this to a much bigger scale. But I was never happy with that sort of shift from small just to do like a bigger version of an object. So I ended up using a found object that is already found in a much bigger scale. So surprisingly, it was a quite simple procedure. It's basically like doing what I do in the studio on a table, on a small space with cranes and big things. So this is it's a found concrete mixer, the back of a truck that was used, and I found the piece and then designed this plinth, which sort of suggests also this possible social space like the idea of creating this twisted plinth and creating that triangular shape at the bottom was also a nice or a gesture to use the space in the square, not only by imposing a big volume, but also allowing people to have a different relationship with the sculpture, maybe using those edges as benches and stuff like that. So I recently, I actually just finished a second version of this work in Brazil, in São Paulo. And I think when I'm talking about concrete here, it's important to say that concrete has been always something that I've been using a lot in my work in general. But I think in this case, the idea of using a big drum like this concrete mixer was also referring to this area that was changing, where there's buildings. Actually, people don't really have an idea until the buildings are growing around this sculpture. So it was this idea of making a monument or talking about buildings, surfaces and things through this sculpture. So I see this sculpture as almost like an excuse to talk about other things and not necessarily just only about the sculpture itself. I would like to suggest, if you have questions during...
What about the color? Is the color the one
this
that
color?
you found in there?
No, this color is it's a paint called red oxide that you use in bridges and outdoors metal to avoid rusting or to stop rusting. But I intentionally kept all the dents and the regular things that there was found in the concrete. Yeah, this is, well, it's the first time I see the one after the other. So this is the date is wrong actually, because this is 2016, it's just finished. But it's a very similar, actually it looks much more similar here because of the photograph, because this one, the mixer, it's very rusted and much more dented than the other one, and the dimensions of the plinth are slightly different as well. But it's in a new building in São Paulo, and this was there was a group of artists. They invited 6 or 4 artists to do different commissions for this space, and I think this is the first one that I've done. I mean, it's interesting for me. It was during this process was very good to see pretty much the same sculpture operating in a different way to do with the environment. Not only that it's a different city, but how the traffic and the buildings and the landscape, even the climate and the weather, all those things sort of play a big role in relation to the sculpture.
This is a public garden.
It's a public garden.
Or is it
It's a private company. It's a private development, but it's open. Yeah.
people can...
Yeah. It's I mean the road is just there, and it's still changing. So right now it's not. It doesn't feel that open because they are going to change a few things in the landscape and the gardens. So it's going to be much more like a part of the street in a way.
Where is it in São Paulo?
It's in Morumbi. It's close to the shopping Morumbi, and there is an area with a lot of buildings, and there's a sort of this financial area in São Paulo, and so this is actually just in front of 2 really big towers where they have offices. This is a very recent project that possibly the biggest and most complicated thing that I've ever made in Chicago at the Museum of Contemporary Art. where they run this project in this plaza in front of the museum. So they've been doing this for maybe 4 years, I don't know. They've done several projects. So they invite an artist to use the space outside the museum, where they also have lots of other things happening. For instance, right in front of the museum, every Tuesday they have like a farmers market, and they do lots of education things and activities outside the museum. So it was a very interesting thing for me to do, because I pretty much started this project thinking about previous works, especially the smaller works, the first image that I presented with the yellow foam, but trying to obviously change the dimension, the scale, try to do something really more architectural that talked about the buildings and environment around the museum, but also that had a similar relationship with the public, not just being, again, like this massive volume in this square, but trying to make something that not necessarily interactive, because I actually don't want to use that word, and it wasn't never my intention, but to do something that I wasn't entirely sure about the work, basically incorporating an element of risk or things that I didn't have total control and didn't know how people were going to relate to that sculpture. So luckily, it's been there for a year, and it's really, I find, rewarding and exciting how people have been like responding to the sculptures, especially because they are very unprotected, if you like. So there's no barriers, and like this one, there's lots of Instagram pictures of people like sitting on them, and we can come back on this one if you want. Do you have pictures of that? Yeah, remember? Yeah, this is a view from inside of the big piece, and I think maybe there is one with a collage. Oh yeah. This was a bit of a surprise. I started like collecting pictures on Instagram, and some of my friends thought it was very uncool that I was posting my own work so often. But I thought it was good because it was like things like this, and pictures that people would just hashtag my name, and then it was also a way for me to see the work and learn with the work and go back to the shapes and the forms and the shadows and sort of rethink the work. And also, the main thing about this, going back to what they made of, so the big tower, the big tall one, they are water pipes, pre-cast concrete, used for water, like to use in rivers, and some of them actually for sewer pipes as well. And that other one there, it's sort of the cap or the lid of a tube. So all this elements, they are actually found materials, because we actually literally went to the place, the factory, and found pieces that I was like, okay, this is what I would like to do. So I don't want to change much, but use them with a slight twist. So all the works, those circles are made of standard measures that they use in their factory, and we just slightly changed the position. So they wouldn't function as pipes if they were as they are now, but I worked a lot with the limitation of the factory standards. So all the holes and the perforations, they are things that it was in their production. So it was like a way of me using the production as well as it's almost like a found element, instead of me imposing a shape or form to the concrete. How with time? Okay, good. So this is a more recent work. This is a show I did at Thomas Dane Gallery in January this year. And again, this is another piece that is used for similar things with water and sewer pipes, but it's just a fraction of a much bigger structure. I could talk more about that one, but I just don't want to use the time and maybe show a little bit more. And this, it's also, specifically this one wasn't the show, but it's a piece made of a parachute and a flagpole. And I had another one that was in the show, not this one, but also made of a parachute, this. And that structure is made of prefabricated flagpoles that they just assemble together and function as a display for this parachute. I mean, I've been talking a lot about this idea that when I talk about my practices with sculpture, I've been thinking a lot about this idea of me not being a typical maker or someone who molds a shape or takes material away, but someone who just points out things that they already exist, and I just put them together or make this proposition for people to look at those things without changing them much. It's almost like not making much, but just rearranging them. So, I mean, all those sort of industrial coincidences and things like this happen in a sort of very natural, organic way, but it's the core of my practice, finding things that they meet together, they come from very different sort of families or universes, and they, by putting them together, you create something else. But you can still see them as they are. So this parachute is just folded. That flagpole is pretty much the same system as you would use for put a flagpole up, a flag up, but without changing that material much. And I think the other thing that this body of work is quite not unusual, but it's like I have my work in general is with smaller things, and it's a more intimate conversation with materials and me being in the studio with them. And this involves other people who work with me. Someone who's actually here works a lot with me, and doing production, making drawings, and thinking together. And I also see the role of those people in the studio or outside the studio, and people like Shande, who works with this project with me. It's also a different way to relate to the work, because I see them as not only like people who assist me, but it's almost like a collaboration. Although I'm not signing the work as a collaboration, but it's a different dynamic in the studio. So what I'm learning with this work is that I don't have total control in the making of the work, and I'm not interested in just being the only one. And also, I don't have total control what happens after, like in that square that people literally climb on the sculpture, and you go like, oh, okay, it's fine, I can work like this. So, yeah, I guess the good thing about talking about this, that it's a recent take on my practice with sculpture, is that I am learning as I'm making this work, and it's something that I try to keep in my practice in general, to not know everything. So I guess I don't know much to learn. Thanks. If you have any questions.